So who are the Yanomami? For decades, the world has seen them through this really polarized lens. Either as this tribe locked in constant, brutal warfare, or as some romanticized vision of the noble savage. Today, we're going to look beyond those stereotypes to understand the complex reality of one of the Amazon's most significant indigenous peoples. Okay, let's dive right in.
So on one side, you have this image of the fierce people, a society supposedly built entirely on violence. And on the other, you've got the noble savage, living in, perfect harmony with nature. But both of these are way too simple, and honestly, they hide a much more fascinating truth. So what is that truth? Well, to find it, we first have to understand their world.
To really get the Yanomami, you have to start with their home. For them, their identity is completely inseparable from the forest. It isn't just a place they live. It's a living, breathing, conscious entity that shapes every single part of their existence.
Their territory is just massive, located way up in the mountainous headwaters between Brazil and Venezuela. You've got a population of over 20,000 people, but they're scattered across hundreds of different villages all throughout this rainforest, a homeland they've lived in since, well, in their own words, the beginning of time.
This quote from the shaman and leader Davi Kopanawa, it just gets right to the heart of their worldview. The forest is a sacred being, and its ultimate owners aren't even humans. They're the shamanic spirits, the sapiri, that bring everything to life. And you can see their social world reflected perfectly in their architecture. Yanomami villages are centered around a shabono, which is this large, circular, communal home. The open design means pretty much all of daily life is a public, shared experience. It really shows how much they value community over individuality.
So, how did this image of a communal forest people get so twisted into that fierce stereotype? Well, the answer lies in a pretty contested history and one incredibly influential book.
As you can see on this timeline, while there were some early encounters in the 20th century, 1968 was a real turning point. But while a bunch of academics were busy debating their nature, a far more brutal reality was unfolding on the ground. You had invasions by miners that brought disease, violence, and even acts of genocide. This crisis is what spurred the rise of Yanomami-led groups fighting to protect their people and their lands.
Napoleon Chagnon's book, Yanomamo, The Fierce People, became a massive bestseller. It was taught in universities all over the world, and for millions of people, its portrayal of a society organized around chronic warfare became the definitive story of the Yanomami. Think about that. This one narrative just overshadowed almost everything else.
Okay, so let's start deconstructing that myth. Because what we're about to see is that far from being chaotic, Yanomami society is built on this really sophisticated and deeply held system of kinship that governs everything from who you marry to politics.
Now, this is really interesting. Their marriage rules basically create social glue. You must marry your cross cousins. That's the children of your father's sister or your mother's brother. But you are absolutely forbidden from marrying your parallel cousins. They're considered siblings. What this system does is it forces alliances between different family groups, weaving this incredibly durable web of community.
The entire fierce stereotype, this whole global image, it all hinges on the translation of a single word, Watari. Chanyon translated it as fierce, and that translation just stuck. But is that what it really means?
Not really, no. Other ethnographers who spent decades living with the Yanomami found that the word has this huge range of meanings. Depending on the context, it can mean brave or courageous or valiant and even generous. All qualities of a respected leader. To boil all of that complexity down to the single word fierce is a massive, massive oversimplification.
And who better to have the final say on this than the Yanomami themselves? Davi Kopanawa's rejection of the label is as clear and direct as it gets. We are not a fierce people.
All right, now let's move from their social world to their inner world, which is every bit as complex and profound. We're going to explore their cosmology, a vibrant reality where the material and the spiritual are completely woven together.
So in the Yanomami view, a person isn't just a single entity. The soul is actually a composite being, made of several distinct parts. For instance, everyone has a spiritual double that lives out in the forest as an animal. They also have these vital essences inside them that can be stolen by malevolent spirits, which is what causes sickness. And then, another part of the soul just departs peacefully at death.
You can really see their rich inner world reflected in their physical adornment, which connects them to the spirits of the forest and the cosmos. This isn't just decoration, it's like a map of their spiritual identity.
And at the absolute center of this spiritual world are the shamans, or the shapari. They're the ones who can communicate with the spirits, the hikura, to heal the sick. But their responsibility is even bigger than that. They have to ritually hold up the sky to prevent the entire cosmos from collapsing under the weight of disease and death.
And that brings us right to their modern struggle. Because while outsiders were busy debating their fierceness, the Yanomami were facing a very real and far more destructive kind of violence.
Their survival today depends on the exact same social solidarity that has always defined them. Faced with illegal mining, deforestation, and disease, it's this communal strength that fuels their resistance and their fight to protect their land and their way of life.
Davi Kopanawa puts the whole fierce debate into perspective with this just stunning quote. He points out that while the Yanomami had forms of ritual conflict, they never had the kind of technology for mass destruction you see in the wars of so-called civilized nations.
And at the end of the day, this is what their fight is about. It's not about some abstract idea of fierceness or nobility. It's about securing a future for their children in the forest world that gives them life and meaning.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question. The Yanomami shamans believe it's their duty to hold up the sky. But as the pressures of the outside world keep growing, their struggle really becomes a question for all of us. How can we make sure it doesn't fall?